everyone. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And as we welcome you into 2024, I'm delighted to share with you today the first episode in our upcoming James Bond Villains documentary. This is a 6-part series where we look at some of the iconic villains that have come up against James Bond, the James Bond versions of Sean Connery, Roger Moore, and Timothy Dalton, to be exact. We have a host of actors lined up for this 6-part series to share some in-behind secrets and scenes from their times on the James Bond movies, never revealed before. Some of their eye-catching scenes going up against Roger Moore, Sean Connery, some of the stories behind the scenes in terms of working with the cast, the shooting of all the movies, the highs, the lows, everything that went on in the James Bond franchise between the 70s and 80s. We have the scoop on it. And so I'm delighted, as I said, over this 6-part series to share some fantastic stories in terms of some actors who have given their time to do this documentary, to relive their stories with us, and some amazing stories to tell that have never been heard before about Roger Moore and Sean Connery and even Timothy Dalton. Roger and Sean no longer with us. So up first in episode 1, I'm delighted to introduce an Indian actor, a renowned Bollywood actor at the time. He made his name in the 70s and before going to 80s, moving to Los Angeles. He got his lead role, his lead break in the James Bond movie, 1983. And the movie was called Octopussy. His name is Kabir Bedi. He played the iconic villain role Gobinda in the 1983 movie Octopussy, alongside Roger Moore, Louis Jordan, Maud Adams, and Stephen Berkoff. So this is episode 1. I really hope you enjoy it. This is the story of Kabir Bedi, who played Gobinda in the 1983 movie Octopussy, where he took on the one and only James Bond, played by Roger Moore.
So at that time, I had just had a very successful career in Europe with a television series called Sandokan that made me a star all across Europe. And the Bond people are always very keen to internationalize their cast. Secondly, I was Indian, and the story was set in India, and the character was for a Sikh Indian, and I fit the bill on that score too. So I was in Los Angeles at the time, because I'd moved to Los Angeles in the early 80s, and shortly after I got there, I got this call saying, would you come to MGM Studios to meet with the Broccolis to talk about a possible role in a Bond film. Of course, I was thrilled, and so I went there, and Barbara Broccoli was there, and John Glenn, the director, was there, and we sat and we talked, and John Glenn got a good look at me, took a good look at me, and nodded to Barbara, and they said, would you be interested in playing this role? I said, absolutely. I said, to be part of any Bond film makes you part of one of the most successful film franchises in history. So for me, it's an honor. I'd be delighted. And then they wanted me to come to England to shoot the role.
Yep.
The problem in England was the unions, because to work in England, you have to be part of the union, and the union wanted to know from the Bond filmmakers why they couldn't take a British Asian actor to do the role. So they had to actually audition 30 British Asian actors and give in writing reasons why they were not suitable for the role, and I was. And that was the process they had to do to get me on board to play Gobinda in Octopussy.
And
so that's how I got the role, and that's how I came to England to shoot the series.
And Kabir, if we look at maybe the Bond villains and the henchmen in Odd Job and Jaws, and what did you want to portray the role of Gobinda? What did you want to bring to the character when you got the script for what was Gobinda was going to be like? What sort of twist or turn, or what was your sort of take initially on the character?
Well, I realized right up front that they hadn't given Gobinda very much to say. He was more of a doer than a talker, because he fights James Bond throughout the film on various occasions. But there's never any great lines or great one-liners from Gobinda. So I knew that I had to sort of play it with a kind of silent threat and menace and attitude, with the danger implicit in the way he moves and talks and looks, and the way he looked at people, etc. So that was the challenge, is how to imbue this Jaws-like character with an extra edge of threat without having the words to do so. I did mention to the Bond people, I said, if Bond is coming to India, why don't you give the henchmen hypnotic powers or other things that Bond normally would not be used to dealing with? Give them a kind of, you're coming to the land of magic and mysticism, give them some kind of supernatural powers. But they said, no, we want to keep it more realistic, which I found a bit ironic. But they didn't want to change the script once they agreed on it. And so we just did the film as it was written.
And Kabir,
it turned out pretty good.
And Kabir, there's one sort of iconic moment where we go back, and it sort of brings us back to the Bond movie Goldfinger, where Oddjob breaks the golf ball with his bare hands, and there's a scene there in the backgammon in the movie where you get a load of dice and with your bare hands and you just break it in pieces.
Crush the dice.
Yeah. And it sort of symbols the sort of strength and the power and this menace, but also this undying sort of loyalty that you had to Kamil Khan.
Right. No, the scene with the die was very, very, very important, and it's the one scene that's remembered the most of Gobinda's moments, because it was just such an unusual thing to do. And for me, the fact that, we were shooting this in Udaipur in India made it even more special, because for me, as an Indian actor shooting a James Bond film in India, on home turf, it was all very special.
Yeah, and Kabir, if we could maybe talk for a second, you were the henchman to Kamil Khan, who was played by the late Louis Jordan, and what was it like working with Louis Jordan and the relation to the character and his portrayal? He was probably one of the most charismatic Bond films, in relation that he had a sort of a charm and a wit about him on screen that was sort of compelling, enticing. Even though you're supposed to hate him, but you couldn't yet be drawn to like him as such.
Louis was a very well-established and very, very well-known star in Europe, particularly. And I think he had this long track record of films behind him. And he was also an extremely good friend of Roger Moore. And so when he got cast as the lead, as the sort of main intellectual villain, as opposed to the physical villain, in Octopussy, it was good for all, because everyone got along very well. And I think Louis was not a man given to many words. He was a great listener, and he had very sharp reactions at times to things people said. But really, Louis was a person who kept to himself for most of the time.
Yeah. And Kabir, I suppose the action scenes in Octopussy are sort of, I mean, there's iconic from fighting on trains to fighting on top of airplanes, and basically the actual shooting and the location and the filming of those scenes and the production then of the mass production on camera to elevate it. Where were most of those scenes and locations shot, and was it over a 6 to 8 month period, or?
It was almost 5 to 6 months of shooting. We did shooting in India, in Udaipur. We shot in England on Pinewood Studios, and we also went for the railway fight sequences. We went up, what was the name of the place? To Peterborough, where the train yards were. But just to give you an idea of the extent to which the Bond people go to get things right. That final scene, where I fight Roger Moore on the plane.
Yes.
The opening bit of that scene, where the plane is taking off and Roger rides up on a horse and jumps onto the outside of the plane as it's taking off. That bit was shot in Udaipur with a stuntman.
Right.
Then the bit where I'm fighting with Roger on top of the train, that was all shot in Pinewood Studios, along with bits in the Peterborough railway yards.
Oh.
And the bit where I fall off the plane at the end,
yes,
that was shot with a skydiver in America.
Wow.
So one scene, and also the plates of the countryside we were supposed to be flying over while we had this fight, that they were shot in Germany.
Oh.
So literally to get one action scene right of a man jumping onto a plane, having a fight with the villain, and eventually prevailing, that one scene was actually shot on 3 separate continents to get it right. And that's the degree of perfectionism that the Bond films team is so well known for and does so well.
Yeah, and Kabir, I suppose for every iconic villains and iconic villain henchmen, there's the anti-villain and there's the hero, and the hero in James Bond in this movie was played by Roger Moore, and Roger Moore, who's no longer with us, and Roger probably brought a charm and a sort of sophistication to James Bond, and even the shooting and running scenes and running lines, running sequences with him. How did you find it to be in the presence of Roger Moore, and how was he like to work with up close, one-on-one?
Yeah, Roger was a very interesting person to work with. His wife at the time was Italian, Louisa.
Yep.
And she was aware of what a big star had become, especially in Italy. So she'd obviously briefed him. So when I met Roger, he met me with a lot of respect. It wasn't just talking to one of the actors who walked onto the set. He met me, he said, Louisa told me how popular you are in Italy, and it was being lovely received in that way. But he remained a fairly reclusive person until the time we spent in Udaipur. When we were literally, we had this wonderful series of suites that overlooked the Lake Palace, and these suites had this wonderful pool in the middle, so it was a kind of common area where we all would assemble, and I got to know him a lot better at the time. And then later when we were shooting in Peterborough, again, there wasn't much to do in the evening, so we'd go out for long walks together. And I got to know him, a really warm, wonderful, and very funny human being. Very profound also, in ways that I didn't expect when we first started, because he was being very formal in the beginning. Yeah. Roger is really, I think Roger is an introvert at heart.
Yeah.
And I think he's a very shy person at heart. And I think he hides it behind this kind of aristocratic demeanor that he puts on. But he is, under the surface, he turned out to be a far more loving, laughing, friendly kind of person. I really enjoy getting to know Roger.
And Kabir, if I can sort of in with this question to you, we all know Octopussy was a smash hit in 1983, and it really capitalised on the James Bond market, which was in such a sequence at the time. And I'll probably leave you actually with two questions. The first question, when you look now at the James Bond series under with Daniel Craig and the direction it's going, are you happy with the way the James Bond sequence is going at the moment? And the second part of the question then is, if I could ask you, your Gobinda was put into a dictionary, and it said Kabir Bedi played the role of Gobinda in Octopussy, and it said, and there was two black lines left underneath that in a dictionary. What would you like those two lines to read?
Right. Well, I'd like to say that Kabir regarded this as one of the highlights of his career, because it gave him an audience of worldwide fans far greater than he'd had before.
Well, yep.
And your first question was?
My first question was, when you look now, when you were at the time the James Bond sequence was in the 80s under Sean Connery and Roger Moore, do you still recognise the James Bond series now under Daniel Craig and the direction it's gone? It's gone more American as such in relation to action thrillers. And do you still think this is still James Bond that you know and love?
No, I think the James Bond series has gone in the right direction, and I think, you know, not just the James Bond series, cinema itself, and commercial cinema in particular, has gone into unbelievably more complex, the way that things are shown, the way things are shot, the way action scenes are mounted, the special effects, the thrills and chills, and the Bond films have used all the technology to the maximum. In fact, I was looking at one of the old Bond films the other day. Forget the name, the one where it's set in Japan.
Oh yes, yes.
Tanaka,
yeah.
Yeah. And when I looked at that, it seemed so simplistic in the way it was shot, in the action scenes that looked so tame by today's standards.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, my God, how cinema has evolved, how the Bond series have evolved. And I think Daniel Craig belongs to the line of Bonds that began with Sean Connery, and Daniel Craig carries that forward in the best possible way.
Yeah.
I think he's the best Bond after Sean Connery. Although Roger was a sentimental favorite, but in terms of pure presence and acting, I think for me it would have to be Sean Connery and then Daniel Craig, for the sheer rugged masculinity that he brought back to the Bond series, and has given it a great edge in faced with the competition that is today from the action thrillers and superhero films that are ruling the market. And Bond's got a lot of competition now.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that it's still one of the most popular franchises speaks volumes for the ability of the creators to not just keep up with the times, but to make the most of all the technology that's available to them. Bond remains an elegant, sexy, thrilling experience.
Kabir Bedi, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you on the airways today in our James Bond Iconic Villains documentaries.
Concludes episode 1 of the James Bond Villains documentary, an insightful look back on the 1983 movie Octopussy, starring renowned Indian actor Kabir Bedi playing Gobinda. But we move forward now, and we move on from 1983 to 1989. In our next episode, do come back, do check us out for episode 2 of the James Bond Villains documentaries. We're moving on to 1989. We're moving on to Timothy Dalton as James Bond. The movie is License to Kill, and the lead villain is the character Fran Sanchez, played by the one and only Robert Davi. So do come back, do check out episode 2 of the James Bond villain documentary. As we said, episode 2 will be featuring all about Robert Davi, who will tell us all his backstory and how he got the part of Fran Sanchez in License to Kill 1989 in Timothy Dalton's Bond movie, License to Kill. But that concludes episode 1 of the James Bond villains documentary. 1983 was the year. Octopussy was the movie. The lead role for James Bond was played by Roger Moore, and one of the main arch villains was the role of Gobinda, played by the one and only Kabir Bedi. But all that's left for me now to say is, from me, Jim Conlon, to everyone watching, Happy Christmas and a Merry New Year, and we'll see you all again in 2024. Take care, folks.